Some of the ideas that we've heard from DOGE so far may seem pretty extreme. 75% reduction of the federal workforce, eliminating entire government agencies. So, is this genius or is this nuts? Joining me now to talk through it is Brandon Arnold, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union. Okay, Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start with this. By far, the government spends most of its money on Social Security, Medicare, defense. A huge amount also goes to veterans benefits. So let me ask you this. Should there be cuts to Social Security, Medicare, defense, or veterans benefits?
I think everything needs to be on the table. If you have these sacred cows that you refuse to touch, you end up making the budget pretty small in terms of what you're actually looking at for waste and inefficiency. And we know very well that there's a lot of waste in, say, the Department of Defense. They haven't been able to pass an audit over there. And so if we go through with a fine-tooth comb and find those wasteful weapon systems, find those $200 toilet seats and so forth, we can save substantial money. And I think we can also build a bipartisan caucus by addressing a department that Democrats have generally been more critical of than Republicans. Let's do this in a bipartisan manner the best we can.
You're talking about a $200 toilet seat. That is a very expensive toilet seat, but still $200 versus $2 trillion that Ramaswamy and Musk want to cut. I mean, $2 trillion, that's huge.
$2 trillion is huge. And when you talk about the discretionary portion of the federal budget, that is the budget that each and every year Congress actually oversees and implements and signs into law. You know, that's about $1.7 trillion. So to get to that $2 trillion figure, you are necessarily looking at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those large entitlement programs. It's an enormous task. And I would agree that I'm optimistic, yet cautiously so, because I know there's a lot of resistance both within Capitol Hill and beyond to touching those very popular programs. They ought to be on the table, but it's a really difficult slog to make any kind of reasonable and significant cuts to those programs.
So, Brandon, over the years, I've done a ton of stories about government waste, and we always go to the lawmakers and we say, what are some examples you have? At one point, there was like a shrimp running on a treadmill. That was a study. I think more recently, a lobster tank for the Defense Department. But then when we actually look into what these things are for, you always find, at least usually, there's somebody out there that actually makes a pretty good case for these studies that may sound crazy. So I'm just curious, does this mean that there are going to have to be all of these fights that have to take place on these things? And can Ramaswamy and Musk really do that from the outside? Can they actually go through all these things and rack up enough savings to hit that $2 trillion mark?
Yeah, that's where the cautious portion of the cautiously optimistic term comes into play here. Because you're right, we have identified all sorts of waste within the federal budget. You know, we give millions of dollars to a hip hop museum in Brooklyn, but the people that benefit from those programs will fight tooth and nail to keep those line items in the budget, even though they're wasteful, and even though the majority of members of Congress would vote to eliminate them given the opportunity to do so. So that's why this becomes really, really difficult an exercise. It's easier to identify that waste than it is to actually get Congress to vote to eliminate it. So I'm optimistic because I think Ramaswamy and Musk have an enormous platform. They have social media. They have celebrities like Joe Rogan that are supposed to be part of this process. But forcing Congress to actually do the right thing is going to be very, very difficult. We're there to help, but there's going to be a lot of obstacles along the way for sure.
And let's talk about this other part that is reducing the government workforce. Social Security Administration has doled out over $1 billion in improper payments. That is money that the government simply lost, trying to recoup it, but we'll see how that goes. It's a ton of money, but the Inspector General said the problem was actually staff reductions and that increased workloads were causing some of these problems. So wouldn't that suggest that in some cases the government actually needs to hire more people to recoup money, not fire people as Musk and Ramaswamy are suggesting?
Possibly, but not necessarily. You know, we see a lot of improper payments at Social Security, with the IRS, with things like the child tax credit, the American Opportunity Tax Credit. We see billions, probably hundreds of billions of dollars in improper payments going out the door. What I would like to see is somebody with tech expertise, say an Elon Musk, begin to automate those processes, begin to create AI tools that perhaps can raise red flags for certain payments before they go out the door that might identify a fraudulent request or an improper payment. So I think we can maybe automate these programs, use technology, use AI to begin to reduce the need for a workforce. That'll make the process hopefully operate more efficiently, more cost effectively.
All right, Brandon Arnold, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.